Hello everyone, I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, but before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? A couple of years ago, when I was 25, I shared an apartment with one of my best friends. Sadly, our friendship started fading as she wasn't around much. However, on this particular night, she decided to stay over and went to bed early. Due to my job schedule, I often stayed up late, and my routine usually involved watching YouTube videos and relaxing. On this night, everything seemed pretty normal until something strange happened. My neighbors actually tried to kidnap me. Let me share a bit more about where I lived and who my neighbors were. Our house had 3 bedrooms, and the 2 bedrooms along with the kitchen faced the neighbors, a young couple residing in a smaller mill house. They kept showing up at our door asking for weird stuff. I'm usually cool with helping neighbors, but these requests were kind of odd. For example, they wanted us to fill up an old Mountain Dew bottle with water because theirs had been turned off. They also asked for beer, and one time they literally asked us for just $1. It was getting a bit weird. When we didn't answer, I'd peek through the window to check. It was strange. Sometimes I'd catch them grabbing leftover cigarette butts from the ashtray or squishing their eyes against the door peephole, trying to see if we were home. So I'm sitting on the couch watching YouTube when I hear a knock at the door. I rolled my eyes because I knew exactly who was knocking. It was 11 p.m., and when I checked through the little door window, there he was, the boyfriend on my porch. Normally I'd just ignore it and go on with my night, but this time, he looked kind of troubled, so I decided to open the door and see what was up. Hey, I just wanted to ask if you could do me a favor. I've got a ring here in my pocket for my girlfriend, and I need someone to record the moment. Can you follow me to my backyard and film it for me? He nervously asked. It was unexpected. I was pretty confused, but really wanted to find out what was happening. I congratulated him and told him I'd join in a moment. I just needed to put on my shoes. Once I closed and locked the door, I rushed to the back room with a view of their backyard, peeking through the blinds. I expected to see some decorations or a setup, but it was totally dark. No signs of anything. It felt odd, so without wasting time, I woke up my roommate to share the whole story with her. No way, she told me, and we both walked back to the door. After the boyfriend started banging on it, I peeked through the little door window again. It was pretty dark outside, and I couldn't see much. Then I saw him move his eye away from the peephole. It gave me a chill, and I quickly turned around, pressing my back against the door. My roommate hurried back to the door from her room, grabbing 2 wire hangers like they were shields. We both clung to the hangers and sat against the door until he finally left. It was pretty scary, but we wanted to be sure we weren't overreacting. So we decided to go out through the back door and hopped into her car for a quick drive around the neighborhood. They always kept their front door wide open, and there were no blinds, so you could easily see inside their house. We drove by slowly in her car. Inside the living room on the couch, the couple and an older man were all just sitting there, staring at the wall. We quickly drove away and decided to stay at a friend's house that night. After that, I stopped answering the door for them. But one day, when I came home from work, I noticed an older lady parked in their driveway. As I got out of my car, she walked up to me and asked if I knew where the neighbors were. I explained that I hadn't seen them in quite a while. Then I asked her who she was, and she informed me that she was the owner of the house. She told me they hadn't paid rent for months, which led to her having to evict them. When she went inside the house, it was a disaster. Needles scattered, garbage all over, walls with holes, and even a mess on the floor. I expressed my sympathy for what she had to deal with, and mentioned that I was glad they were finally out. But thinking about the condition of their house, I felt a sense of relief that I hadn't followed him to the backyard. Who knows what he might have had planned that night? When I was 19 years old, I had a job in a small mall in my quiet town. Not many serious crimes happen there, and it's a peaceful place. However, the city that's about 15 minutes away used to have one of the highest murder rates in Canada. The mall where I worked wasn't too big. It was a common spot for moms with their kids and older people looking to pass the time. It's a really safe mall, not sketchy at all. One day, during my break, I headed to the food court to grab a drink and scroll through my phone, just like I always did. As I sat there, I noticed two women walking towards me. My first guess was that they saw my work uniform and might have questions about something my store sells. I didn't think anything bad was happening. They walked up to me and quickly sat down at my table in the food court. Both of them spoke with strong accents, though I wasn't sure what kind, as I hadn't heard it before. They were dressed really fancy, like they were going to church or a special event, and seemed pretty regular, nothing strange about them. Then one of the women took out a book, and they started asking me some strange questions. Like, do you go to church, and do you believe in God? Mostly, they asked things about religion. I thought they might be some kind of missionaries. They started telling me about God the Mother. Since I'm really shy, I just listened to them talk. Then they invited me to a youth group they organized for that evening. I was a bit surprised, not expecting such an invitation during my break at the mall. I told them I was at work, just taking a break, so going with them wasn't possible. But they kept insisting, and I had to repeat a few times that I couldn't join. Finally, they got the message. But then they asked for my phone number, saying they'd text me the details the next time they organized something. I felt a bit uneasy, but gave them my number to end the conversation. A couple of days later, I got a text from them trying to plan something for the youth group. I felt a bit trapped because I wasn't really interested, but I didn't want to be rude. I hesitated for a moment, thinking about whether to reply or not. Eventually, I decided to block the number. It wasn't that I thought they were going to do something bad. I just wasn't into the idea of going to a youth group. I hoped blocking the number would make it clear that I wasn't interested without having to explain. A few months later, I was reading the news, and there was a story about a warning for young girls in our city regarding a human trafficking scheme. The report mentioned a tactic where women would approach people and talk about God the Mother, trying to convince them to leave with them. I felt a rush of relief, realizing that I hadn't finished my shift that day. When those women approached me, I wondered what might have happened. Moreover, I was thankful that I never responded to their text. It's strange to think about how a small decision like that might have kept me safe. When I spent the night at my friend's house in middle school, we liked staying up late. The only tricky part was that the bathroom was near his parents' room, and we didn't want to get in trouble for waking them up, especially during those late-night nature calls. To avoid any problems, we came up with a plan. Instead of using the bathroom, we quietly sneaked out through the basement door and went into the woods to take care of business. The door was almost always open because we sometimes forgot our keys and got locked out. It happened a lot since we often went out to do things in the woods. On this particular night, my friend's older brother was around, and he kept barging in through the basement door, making the situation even more chaotic. So we came up with another plan to stop him from constantly barging in. We decided to lock the door, even though we knew it wouldn't really keep him out. The idea was that he'd have to use the key, and maybe that would take away some of the fun for him. But around midnight, we heard the door handle jiggling. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just his brother messing around. Then, after about 5 minutes of the handle being jiggled on and off, we got a bit frustrated. That's when we decided to take action. We went up to the door, hit it, and shouted at him to stop. However, all we got in response was silence. We thought that was a good thing and hoped it was all over. But about 10 minutes later, the jiggling started again. This kept happening, repeating for about 2 hours. No matter how many times we told him to stop, he didn't listen. Eventually, we got frustrated and just said, forget it, deciding to ignore him. Even after we stopped paying attention, he kept going for about half an hour more. It felt like forever, but finally, he gave up. Let's jump ahead to around 9 in the morning. We were just waking up, and one of my friends needed to use the bathroom. You know how it is at sleepovers. People are sleeping wherever there's space, and when one person starts moving around, it wakes everyone up. We all started stretching and heading to the bathroom to get rid of the soda we drank the night before. As I walked out, I grabbed the door handle to close it behind me and noticed it felt weird, like it had a rough texture. When I checked it, I saw that the area around the keyhole was messed up. There were big scratch marks everywhere, and the metal parts were all bent and crooked. I asked my friend who lived there what had happened, and he said it was the first time he noticed it. We didn't want to get blamed for what his brother did, so we went upstairs and explained everything to his parents. When his dad went downstairs to see what we were talking about, his face went pale, and he hurried back upstairs to call the police. It turned out that someone had been trying to force the lock open while we were all in the house. It was pretty scary to think that someone had been trying to get in while we were sleeping. This had happened to me more than once on different occasions, but what really scared me this time was that the person knew we were in the house, and we knew someone was trying to break in. But they still kept trying to force their way inside. It was pretty disturbing. I have no idea what kind of person he was or what he had in mind for us that night. I live on the 6th floor with my family, and we've been here for a long time. The apartment next to ours is owned by a not-so-nice lady who rents it out. But the problem is, she seems to rent it to people who cause a lot of trouble. I'm talking about serious problems like drug dealers and domestic violence. This happened a few years ago when I was around 14 or 15 years old. I'm a female, and English isn't my first language, so forgive any grammar mistakes. The couple, probably 35 to 40 years old, had just moved in with their young daughter, who looked about 6 years old. The wife introduced herself, and she seemed nice at first. They mostly kept to themselves, and that was okay with us. But a few weeks after they moved in, things got tricky. They played really loud music during the day and night. It wasn't against the rules, but it bothered us when it went on for hours every day. Then we could hear shouting from their apartment, but it always seemed to be the husband doing the yelling. They started leaving their apartment door open, and when we walked by to use the elevator, they would be walking around in their underwear. It was strange, but we thought maybe it was because it was summer and hot. It became more bothersome when we had guests, as they had to walk past a nearly naked man just hanging out by our door, smoking. Smoking was just another issue. I don't mind weed, as I've also tried it a few times myself, but when they smoked, a lot of smoke would come into our apartment. It was so much that you could see it everywhere. My mom was really bothered because we had a little kid in our apartment, my brother, who was about 4 years old. We didn't want him breathing in smoke every day, but we decided to just deal with it and hope they would move out eventually, like the other people who lived there before. Usually, no one stayed for more than a year. One day, I was coming home after walking with my dogs. We have 2 dogs, a medium-sized one and a small one, both rescued. I unlocked my apartment door, and the dogs went inside. Just as I was about to follow, I heard a hey behind me. I turned around and got scared when I saw who it was. It was the husband. For more information, we hadn't talked before this. He was very close to me, like just inches away from my face, and he was only in his underwear. He was taller than me by a lot, so I felt uncomfortable. I asked if he needed something, and then he quickly looked around, as if checking for other people in the small hallway we shared. After that, he came even closer, and I could feel his breath on my face. It smelled like weed, and I tried not to gag so I wouldn't be rude. At that time, I always tried to be nice to everyone, even in risky situations like this. Then in a rough voice he whispered, "What do you want?" I was confused. I thought I heard wrong, so I asked him to say it again. "What do you want? Drugs? Alcohol?" My eyes got really big. I was taught not to drink or do drugs, and even if that wasn't the case, I was clearly underage. So, I didn't understand why he was offering these things to me. No thank you, mister," I said. I had hoped that by being polite, this interaction would be over and I could go inside. If you're wondering why I didn't just go inside sooner, like I said, I was a major people pleaser, and I didn't want to offend him. But also, I didn't know how he would react. I didn't want to risk him chasing me inside or assaulting me. If he was unstable enough to corner a teenage girl in his underwear and offer her illegal substances, I didn't want to imagine what would happen if I pissed him off. Al, come on, you must want something. I can hook you up with whatever, he said, giving me a wide grin and somehow stepping even closer. I moved my back against the door, realizing I couldn't make more space between us. Then I let out a nervous laugh. No thanks, my mom wouldn't like me having that, I said. He tilted his head, still smiling. Well, is she home now? Silly me, I said no. She was at work. Oh, well then, she doesn't need to know. Just tell me what you want. I started breathing really fast. I've had problems with men being mean to me before, so a man standing over me and trapping me made me really anxious. I felt like I might throw up, and I could feel myself starting to shake. I just hoped he wouldn't notice. No thanks, I said again. I have to go. I have homework to do. I was trying to smile so he wouldn't know I was scared, but my shaking got worse. He seemed annoyed, but nodded and said to have a nice day. I hurried inside and quietly locked the door. I was breathing hard, and I peeked through the small hole in the door, but he was still there, just staring at my door. He looked like he was out of it, and I hoped he would leave. He stood there for about 30 more seconds, then suddenly turned around and ran into his apartment. I heard him going through cabinets, and in my mind, I thought he might be looking for something to break into my house. Now I was getting really scared. I grabbed my phone, called my dogs, and rushed to the kitchen to get the biggest knife I could find. I sat on the floor and stared at the door while calling my mom. I was almost crying when she answered, and she told me to call the cops if I thought I was in danger. But for some reason, I said no. Maybe I thought I didn't want to bother the police for something that might not be a big deal. My mom couldn't leave work early, but she called the cops as soon as she got home. Meanwhile, his wife had come back home a few minutes later. She knocked on our door. My mom answered while I stayed behind her. She asked my mom lots of questions about what I told her and what happened. When my mom explained and said the police were called, the wife nervously laughed and said, "It wasn't needed. My husband didn't mean any harm. He was just trying to sell you some CDs he makes, as he really likes music." What? He kept asking me if I wanted alcohol multiple times. How did she start talking about selling CDs? But my mom didn't buy it, and she knows what really happened. She trusts me. The woman's smile turned into an angry face, and she went back into the apartment. We heard her lock the doors, close all the curtains, and turn off the lights. The police arrived shortly after and came inside to hear what happened. Then they went to their door and knocked, but nobody answered. We told them we saw everyone go inside and lock themselves in, but they couldn't do anything about it because they didn't have a special permission, and no one physically hurt me. They said the man would get a warning, but only when they could reach him. The police left, and we didn't hear anything else from the neighbors all day. We went to bed later. I had trouble falling asleep, but eventually managed to. During the night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a woman screaming. It was loud and really upsetting, and I thought someone might be in trouble. I heard my mom going to the closest window, and then she came to my room and said to stay in bed. I wanted to ask her more about what was happening, but I trusted my mom, so I stayed in bed like she told me. I eventually fell asleep again. When I woke up, my mom sat me down at the kitchen table and explained that the man from yesterday had jumped out of the window during the night. Since we were on the 6th floor, he probably died when he hit the ground. The screaming we heard was from his wife, watching him climb out of the window and jump, unable to stop him. I felt really bad. I almost started crying, and it made me think that somehow it was my fault. After that incident, my mom felt bad for leaving me home alone to go to work, but she couldn't do much about it because we didn't have a lot of money. I was at home with my little brother because he was sick, and I wasn't going to school because I was too upset. Well, a few days later, when my mom left for work, there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw it was the guy's wife. She was smoking a cigarette. Her eyes were red, and she looked really upset. She was walking around and talking to herself. I told my little brother to go into his room and went to open the door. When I did, and the wife saw me, she started to get really angry and pointed her cigarette near my face. "How dare you? Why did you call the police on my husband? Why? He didn't do anything to you. He just wanted to sell you some CDs, and you reported us. Are you scared of men or something? Are you scared of men in underwear? Is that it?" I couldn't believe what she was saying. If it were me today, I would have told her to go away and shut the door right in her face. But at that time, I was young, not very smart, and too trusting. So what did I do instead? I said, "Sorry." I told her I was sorry about her husband and that I really hoped she could forgive me. "You little piece of whore. You killed my husband. It's all your fault, and I wish that you, your mom, and brother all get sick and die." I looked down at the ground without saying anything, still sure it was my fault. She kept saying mean things, but eventually she left. I went back inside, locked the doors, and cried. I cried for about half an hour, and my little brother kept asking what was wrong, but I didn't tell him. I've been talking to someone about my feelings and taking medicine for the past year or two. I can say I'm in a better place now. The incident with Happy. This happened about 4 years ago. I'm 21 now and no longer live in that neighborhood, but yesterday when I visited my parents, I saw my old neighbor and it reminded me of what happened. Here's some background. I live in a third world country, and our neighborhood is considered one of the worst, at least by outsiders. Despite this, we are quite friendly with each other, even with those who have been in jail. Our community includes many people with mental health challenges, and one of them is a man my mother and I call Happy, because his name literally means that. We used to joke, "Oh, Happy, are you happy?" because he often had a smile on his face, unless someone upset him, which happened about 3 times a year. I stayed in that neighborhood for about 19 years, so I knew him well. He lived with his 2 brothers. One sold fruit, and the other drove a taxi. Happy didn't have a job due to a mental illness, which I think might be a form of schizophrenia, though I'm not sure. His condition made it difficult for him to function like others. Conversations with him were hard because his sentences didn't make much sense, and he couldn't talk about normal topics like sports or news. Sadly, mental illness is not taken seriously in my country. We only have 3 facilities for people with mental health issues, so there's no way for him to get proper treatment. Most people just called him crazy, which is really sad. My dad used to be friends with Happy and his brothers, but they eventually drifted apart. Dad would give Happy some money to buy cigarettes, and knew that the brother who drove the taxi had 2 kids to support in another city, while the fruit-selling brother didn't make much. Happy sometimes helped carry groceries, and my dad would give him some money for that. So, growing up, I knew Happy as a helpful, friendly person. I always smiled at him, and he would smile back at me. But when I turned 15, Happy changed a lot. He still had a smile, but he would stand in shady spots all day, smoking. He was always there, from early morning to late at night, and it seemed like he barely slept. He started staring at me with a creepy, forced smile whenever I passed by. Sometimes he would walk backward while staring at me, or press his back against walls as if he were hiding. His whole demeanor shifted, and he started getting angry more often, yelling things that didn't make sense and stomping angrily back to his house. Now, let me tell you what really happened. When I was 17, I stayed home one day to study while my family went out. Happy must have noticed that I was alone, as I saw him standing in his usual spot, staring as they drove away. Around lunchtime, I went to buy some groceries. Happy was standing near his brother, who was selling fruit at the local market. I bought my vegetables and meat, and as I walked home, I noticed that Happy was right behind me. I didn't think much of it since our houses were next to each other. But when I passed his house, his footsteps didn't stop. I turned around and saw him still staring at me with that unsettling smile.